every adoptee wants to see pictures of their parents, of their birth parents. This baby that brought you so much joy and completed your family was gotten at the expense of another person's life. Is this okay? Like, are we all okay with the idea that people are making money off of the sale of babies?
Laura was adopted into a family with Polish heritage, and she also believed that she herself was half Polish. For many years from early adulthood, she had searched for her birth mother in a variety of ways and couldn't find any traces of her. When she was able to take a DNA test, she connected with her birth mother's sisters and found out that her ethnic background was very different from what she had been told. After learning more about the agency that facilitated her adoption and considering how her birth mother may have felt, she has changed her views and opinions on the adoption industry. Here is my interview with Laura.
Were you adopted from birth, and where were you adopted from?
I was adopted at birth. I was adopted from an agency called Easterhouse in Chicago. I think they had other locations with other names. And this is before you could get you could find out the sex before a baby was born. So my parents knew that there was a lady who was pregnant and that if she had a girl, because my parents wanted a girl, that I would be theirs. And that was the case. I was a girl. So then they called my parents up, and I guess 3 days later, and I was like 3 days old when they came and got me.
So you were adopted in Illinois. Is that where you grew up at?
Yes. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago.
And do you remember how you found out that you were adopted?
Yeah, I do. When I was around, I want to say it was third grade is the grade that I remember it to be. And they basically sat me down and just sort of told me the story. Like, there was a lady who was pregnant and she couldn't take care of you, so we wanted a girl. So we said we would, and that was kind of the end of that. That was sort of the conversation.
So when did you start thinking about finding your birth family, and was there anything specific that made you want to find them?
I think every adoptee wants to see pictures of their parents, of their birth parents, Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably my number one motivation for a very long time. And my adoptive parents were very understanding, I guess, of the idea that I would probably eventually want to find more information about my birth parents. So they had actually kept all of my legal documents, all the, from when they had to go to court and officially change my birth certificate and that kind of thing. So I had the name of what I thought was my birth mother's name in all these legal documents.
So how did you go about finding your birth mother, and what were some of the obstacles that you ran into?
Well, I found my birth mother's family. She had actually passed away before I really got into it, but I found the family by DNA. And I had been kind of searching on and off with a variety of intensity probably since I was like 18. The name on the legal documents put my birth mother's name as Kay Michaels. And as the years wore on, it finally occurred to me that this was probably a made-up name because there was no such person, no such family. I just couldn't find anything about, any K. Michael in the Chicago area, any time period, So probably around maybe 2011 or 2012, it was like right around then, I decided to do DNA tests. And I ended up I did 3 because I was just like, all right, we're going to spread it around because I didn't know where I would find any relatives, so I thought I'll just spread it around. And I did finally connect up with my birth mother. She had 4 siblings. And it was all girls. And 2 of them are still alive. And they were both on Ancestry's DNA. And wow. So when I did finally find them, it was finally revealed to me that, the name was wrong. That was not her real name on the documents. Even on my original birth certificate, still said Kay Michaels. According to her sisters, that was a stage name. She had this minor modeling career, and that was the name she went by when she was modeling. So, so even in all the legal documents. So that was really if it wasn't for DNA, I would never have found anybody.
Yeah, with that name, you would have definitely never found anybody.
Right. It's common. It's so common also. For a long time, I thought it's such a common name. One time I went downtown Chicago and I looked through the old city directories,
mm-hmm.
just to see if there was any Michaels anywhere in the address that she put, and it just was like, no, she was like a ghost. So yeah, I would have never found anybody.
Yeah. You were basically, we'll just say, marketed as being Polish. And
Yes, yeah. That's kind of a funny story too, because and that was part of the story that my parents used to say. They told me straight up, like that when they had been in the interviews with the adoption agency said, do you have any, I don't know that they said requests, but, like, is there anything particular that you were, like, hoping for, I guess? And my parents both being of Polish descent, and they were the children of immigrants, so they were like, well, if a Polish lady who's pregnant, we, you know what I mean? Like, to help somebody who's Polish. I mean, I believe that they meant it in the best possible way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not in a, like, we want to pick out, the Polish girl. But yeah, Easterhouse was notorious for a lot of corruption and a lot of lies to both the birth moms and the adoptive parents. And so basically my parents were told that I was half Polish and then quarter German and quarter Dutch. The Dutch and German were supposedly from my birth father, and the Polish was supposedly from my birth mother. And the DNA test at the end of the day, which both my adoptive parents have passed, so they didn't really get to know this either. The DNA test showed that I was like this, that there was like some Latino, there was some like Italian, there was some Native American, and there was Greek. But there was really like no German, no Dutch, very little Polish, like a fraction, And it turns out now that I found both birth parent families, my birth mother was 100% Greek, the daughter of immigrants, and my birth father was an immigrant to the United States from Chile.
Wow.
So I'm basically half Chilean, half Greek, which is a long way from Polish and German.
Did you have more of like an olive skin tone? I mean, being Polish myself, I know sometimes we're like so pale we're translucent.
Yeah, it's funny. So my parents had 2 children of their own. My mom had a lot of trouble having children, and my parents were older. So that was part of the whole idea of the Easterhouse. My parents just turned 40 when they adopted me, which is like crazy, even in 67, because usually if you're 40 and over, it's very difficult to find an infant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also, my parents had 2 of their own children, which is, again, practically impossible, to, at least now, to get a child when you have your own children. And so Easterhouse was pretty notorious for basically taking people's money and giving them a baby. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't...
Yeah. It was a transaction.
They didn't... Yeah, it was more transactional, I think, for them, which isn't great optics, obviously, but that was the case. And so, what was your original question? Because now I feel like I veered off.
No, I was just asking if you had like a similar skin tone, like to where they would think that you were actually Polish.
Right. Okay, so my brothers all have blue eyes and dark hair. And I have blue eyes and dark hair.
Oh, okay.
So my adopted parents have blue eyes. The only thing that was really different about me versus my brothers is that, like my skin is definitely a little more olive. Mm-hmm. And as far as if I have any kind of sun, I get pretty dark pretty quickly. And they were both, like when they were born, they were blonde. Like white blonde. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I never had a blonde day in my life. You know what I'm saying? There's no way. Nope. Not even a little. So, I mean, it did seem weird that they thought I was Polish, but I didn't look that different from my parents, from my adoptive parents. And I looked a lot like my brothers in sort of a general way.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I looked weird. Actually, I looked a lot like, I could send you a couple pictures. I actually look a lot like my adoptive mom. And strangely, we were both the same height. So it was a pretty good match, I have to say.
Yeah. So once you met your mother's family, who were Greek, was it difficult to be thrown into a new culture and a family that was so deeply rooted in that culture?
Yeah, it was. I mean, not in a bad way, but like, they were like, seemed to be surprised that being Greek was like new to me. They were like, oh, and when I told them, and to them, I was one of them.
Yeah. And
to me, this was all foreign. I didn't have that same feeling, and which to their credit, they really did welcome. They're lovely people. But yeah, they had all this history and stuff and all this ethnic food. And I mean, of course I've eaten Greek food and stuff, but like it wasn't what we had in my house. You know what I mean? I grew up with this Polish culture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This was what we did. They all spoke Greek and stuff. It was weird and it kind of a bummer to like realize that this was something that I'd kind of missed out on.
Yeah, it's hard later in life to be exposed to something like that. Like the traditions and even holidays in some cultures are
Yeah,
celebrated
yeah.
different.
And even like afterward, it's been a couple years since I found out my definitive nationality based on my birth parents. But when I first found it out, if people would ask me, "Oh, what's your nationality?" It would take me like a few seconds to compose my thoughts. To, oh, wait, that's right, I'm not Polish. You know what I mean? Like I had to remember that I'm, half Greek, half Chilean. It was so new to me.
Yeah.
That took some adjusting, I think.
Yeah. Like, oh, I'm not
Because
Polish
it's like
anymore.
your identity. You know what I mean? It's like I believed that I was this one thing.
Right. Yeah.
Until I was like 50. So,
Yeah.
and then now that I found out, it's like fine, but it's just weird. It's just weird when your identity is so rooted to one thing, and then you find out that was not even the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting used to the idea that you're something else entirely, and
Right.
how to kind of marry the two together, I guess.
Right. A lot of times when I tell people I'm half Greek, they'll be like, "Oh, you speak Greek?" They go down this list of things that Greek people that they know do. And it's like, I don't do any, you know what I mean? I've never been to Greece. I don't have a connection to Greece particularly.
Yeah.
Specifically, no. But yeah, so it's kind of weird.
So did your birth mother have any other children?
She did not. So she had already passed when I found her family. So like she was like 22 or 23 when I was born. And there is some evidence that I would say that if it was a different world, she would have tried to keep me. I think there's a lot of evidence that she tried to keep me, but because she was unmarried, my birth father, it was a married man, not to her. So it was like a lot of things are going on, you know what I mean? And I think, like I said, there's just some evidence that she wanted to keep me.
Yeah.
And after I was adopted, her sisters all continued to have children. So, like, how much of a rub is that? You know what I mean? Like, my sisters get to have babies and get to do all the things with babies, but I don't get to have a baby. Her family told me on the times that I met them that her name is Catherine. My birth mother's name is Catherine. That Catherine was kind of difficult. She was difficult with the family. She drifted in and out of the family sometimes. Some years she didn't even show up for Christmas, didn't show up for holidays, just was nowhere to be found. And then other times she was around. And it just felt like their understanding of why she was so troubled didn't seem like it was coming from the right place. They just seemed to be like, I don't know why she was so messed up. Do you think the adoption had something to do with it? Like, I don't know. Like, I didn't know her, but it feels like that probably had something to do with that. She never had any other children. She married late in life to a man who unfortunately ended up dying 5 years later. And so she never married again, never had any kids, any other than me. And she'd had a stroke. It wasn't super debilitating. She was in a walker and a wheelchair, but even with that, her sisters were, well, she could walk. She just liked to be in the chair. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a lot of that.
So they were like super hard on her, apparently, no matter what.
Like, she was the youngest, too, so the oldest is one of my aunts who is still alive, and so I think, the difference between the oldest and the youngest sometimes can be like,
oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? You got everything easy, you were catered to, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of the vibe I get from the oldest sibling that's still alive. The first time I met the family, I went there they were all there, and there was like this kind of thing. I don't know if it was for me in particular. So I met everyone, and I expected everyone to be like, here's all these pictures of your mom, and here's all these stories I'm going to tell you about her, so you can like know her more, you can get to know this person that you're related to. And it wasn't like that at all. I would ask questions, and they would say, like, one of the things that they said, oh, she was a big reader. She read a ton of stuff. She was always reading. And I was like, oh, cool. What kind of stuff did she like to read? And then nobody knew. I don't know. It just was weird. If my brother's was dead and one of his long-lost children showed up, I would have a million stories to tell them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would have all these pictures. They would be bombarded with all the stuff that I would end up dumping on them, because it'd be like, oh my God, here's somebody new you need to know,
Yeah. And like, this is all part of you,
Right. Even pictures. I mean, they did give me some pictures, but just a smattering. It wasn't like, oh, and here's your baby picture or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was kind of weird that way too.
Yeah. It was similar with my dad's birth mother. Nobody really had a nice thing to say about her. And I often wondered if it was, because she had given a child up for adoption and it was something that she carried. And I think a lot of people, at least around that time, had this view like it was a second chance for you or something. And that's how you should treat it. Now you can go on to live your life. I don't know. It just seemed like that's kind of how it was looked at by other people.
Yeah, that was kind of the fable when my adoptive parents would talk about my adoptions. It was always in the framing of it like your mom loved you so much that she gave you up because she knew she couldn't take care of you.
Yeah.
And I think more likely is that she had no other choice.
Yeah.
And everyone was against her having me.
Right.
And keeping me. So it was like, what was she supposed to do? Live in the streets? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know, there were no social services. You couldn't get help from the government or anything like that at that time.
Yeah.
She was just stuck, you know, like a lot of women. I mean, yeah, I'm one of the baby scoop era kids. That's another, you know, kind of, like I discovered that. I was like, oh, damn.
Yeah.
This is definitely like what happened to my birth mom, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot of that going on around that time.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, yeah.
So have you been able to make contact with anyone from your birth father's family?
Yes, and I got it through DNA because I would have never, found them any other way. And they're all online and stuff. So it turns out my birth father, he did immigrate from Chile to the United States with his wife and his oldest son, who I talked to, his oldest son. And they moved around. He was a librarian, managed different libraries around. And he eventually landed in Chicago, met my birth mother. They had some kind of relationship. When I talked to his son, it turns out this person, my birth father, he was one of those people who, he abandoned his family, the one with his son, when they immigrated. He had just left one day and just never came back. And then turned out he had another wife and another daughter, in addition to me. So he's, sort of setting up franchises, I guess, in that way. He was one of those guys, you know what I mean? He was kind of a rolling stone. So all of the children of him, they have very little information. They have almost no pictures of him because he kind of just disappeared.
Huh.
So there's very little information about him, except for that I know his basic details.
Have you looked up stuff on him on Ancestry, like records and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I did a little bit. I don't remember what I found, but I only remember it being kind of similar to what I already knew about him, about, where he kind of was around the United States.
Yeah.
And, where he immigrated into the United States, too. He flew in just like a regular, you know what I mean? They just flew.
Yeah.
Which is also an interesting immigration story. I've never had one where they flew here. I mean, usually it's we took the boat from the old country, So, yeah, so that was interesting. But they were very cool. That family was very cool. They're all still in the Chicagoland area. Everybody is still in the Chicagoland area, both my birth parents' families.
So have you met either of his children?
No, I didn't. I was already living in North Carolina when I found them.
Okay.
And when I go back, I don't have a ton of time. It's I'm usually pretty booked. But, if I ever go back and I have again, I don't know where to put these families either in my life. I find that difficult too. Where do they go? You know what I mean? How much, because I don't even talk to my own family that much. So it feels weird to put a lot of effort to, God, I know that sounds terrible, but I just don't know how much effort I haven't reconciled in my head, how much effort I need to put toward this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or how much you want to put towards it. How much you have to give, really,
Right. Because, in a lot of ways, my questions are answered.
Yeah.
Unless they come at me with new stuff like photos or stories or something like that, I don't really have other questions. They don't seem to be able to answer a lot of the ones that I have anyway. So.
Yeah, especially since both of your parents are gone, and unless you have an instant connection with one of your half siblings, or you're both really willing to put the work in, sometimes it just doesn't happen.
Right. Just like everybody, I'm sure all the old photos are in somebody's closet in a box somewhere. You know what I mean? It's who's got time to go through that? I get it. It's a lot to do for somebody you just barely even met and who, has this tenuous connection to your family.
Yeah, and the kids also, they may have some resentment because their father didn't stick around with them, and they may not really know him that well,
It doesn't sound like they did.
Yeah.
Honestly, it doesn't sound like her sisters knew her very well either.
Yeah.
I think for both of their reasons, for whatever reasons they both had, both my birth parents were pretty distant as far as family-wise.
Yeah. So are you still in touch with her sisters, your birth mother's sisters?
Yeah, I am. I haven't talked to them in a while. Like I said, they're still in the Chicago area, but I do, drop an email here and there. They're happy to hear from me. I am the only living remainder of their sister. I try to remind myself of that they are my aunts. They both really welcomed me with love and, all the things, but it's hard not to remember that there was my birth mom could have used some of that love, I think, at the time.
Yeah, if she had some support, it may have all been different, right?
Right. I mean, again, because she had such a difficult relationship with her family, I think that Catherine's relatives and stuff that remember her and knew her, they have said to me a couple times, well, she probably wouldn't have made that great of a mother.
Huh.
But I think that's a pretty bold thing to say when the only thing you knew of a person, the only thing you can remember of a person is when they've already had their kid taken away.
Yeah.
Like I always tell people, you don't know that. You don't know that she would have made it bad. Because lots of people have babies and their lives are screwed up and they get them together.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is
definitely.
Lots of people have babies all the time. They're poor. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just that she didn't have any support. There was no future where she could figure out where she could keep me.
And you have to wonder if she was made to feel that way too, because she didn't have any more children.
Yeah, I do wonder that too. If she internalized, I think she probably did. She probably internalized the whole thing, and she maybe at some level believed that she was a terrible person for having a baby out of wedlock, for having a married man's baby, whatever.
Yeah.
Because back then, I'm sure that was part of the problem. How do you explain that to your neighbors? Which is obviously stupid, but actually I've told people this before. I'm kind of glad that my adoptive parents didn't find this part of the story out, because I think knowing that this baby, they brought you so much joy and completed your family, was gotten at the expense of another person's life, basically, or the potential of their future was kind of terrible. That's not what they would have wanted. That's not what anybody wants, I don't think.
No, I think there is an attempt now to make adoptive parents more aware of what the birth parents are feeling.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's hard for adoptive parents to have done all the work and then see the birth parent just sort of roll up at the end of the day, sort of at the end of, the hard part. But I would say the birth parent had the hard part too. That was already hard. If either one of my adoptive parents would have had a problem with me looking for my birth parents, I don't think they would have ever told me.
No.
I think they would have tried really hard to keep that to themselves, because I think they understood on some level that you need to know this information. This is part of you, and you need to know it if you can find it,
So do you still have relationships with a lot of your adoptive family?
I was closer when I was in town. Again, I'm sure they also feel like, where do I belong in their family? Like, what should they be doing as far as with me? It's not like my phone's ringing off from them, and that's fine. But you know what I'm saying? I'm sure they feel the same way. Like, yeah, we have got this other cousin that exists. If I were to call any of them up or anything, they would be glad to hear from me. But we haven't really been keeping up a really tight relationship like that. Again, because I think none of us really know where to put it. Where does this relationship go?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not an acquaintance. I'm like a relative.
So have you kept up with the two siblings you grew up with in your adoptive family?
Oh, yeah. No, we're all very close. We're close, and I just said I didn't really talk to them that much. But yeah, we're not super talkative folks.
Yeah.
I don't know if that sounds weird or not, but we're not the kind of people where I'm calling up my brothers and we're talking on the phone for 2 hours. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, how's it going? Shoot out an email. What's going on? Here's what we're doing. What are you doing? And then I'm up to speed. We usually get together at Christmas or holidays or whatever. But yeah, we have remained close. We always were a pretty tight family.
So how do you think your life has changed now that you know more about your birth family and their families?
I think learning all of this and even other people's stories and other people's adoptive journeys, I think I have a lot less good feelings about the adoption industry in general. You know what I mean? I think private adoptions and ones where you literally change the name and you change the birth certificate, I'm not sure that I approve of that. You should have full and free access to your birth certificate, full and free access to who your birth parents are. I don't know why in this day and age, 2023, while we're acting like we can't know who who your birth mom is. It's like, is there really this much stigma around this? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And even just the whole idea of adoption. For about 6 months, my husband Steve and I considered adoption. We thought about having kids, but I was too old, and so we thought, oh, maybe we'll adopt. And I looked into it, and it would have cost me $40,000 just to go through the process, and that would have not guaranteed me a baby.
Wow.
$40,000. And that's a lot of money. And it is. They could break down, okay, this much goes to the birth mom and this much. But you know what? You could just give $40,000 to the birth mom. I bet you could just keep the baby.
Yeah, true.
It's like this transaction makes me very uncomfortable. I'm very close to buying and selling human beings.
It basically is.
You know what I mean? Like, that is a very gray area that makes me very uncomfortable. And I just think that it's ripe for abuse, and it has been for years and years. I mean, you hear about these things like after the Haiti hurricane, adoption agencies and orphanages headed down there, you know, looking for orphans. It's like a little predatory.
Yeah.
Or maybe sometimes a lot predatory. And I would say that's probably the number one thing that's changed in my life, is that I'm really not that keen on adoption anymore. I kind of think it's sort of shady, slippery slope.
Yeah, you got the chance to be able to like actually feel for your birth mother and understand the birth mothers a little better and understand that it's a traumatic event for them.
Right. It's not like she gave me up so that she could be free. You know what I mean? She was not like she was like going, like she was like, oh, phew, now I can go back to my NASA program that I was studying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
She didn't give me up to do anything.
Yeah.
Or to go and do anything. It was just because she couldn't keep me.
Yeah.
Which is not the way it was always presented to me. Like when you're a kid and your parents are like, oh, your mom loved you so much that she... Yeah, in one respect that is true, but in another respect it's like, why did all of this have to happen, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you tell other people who are entering the journey to seek out their birth families?
I would tell them just to keep an open mind and try not to judge anyone for their decisions, because I think that's really easy to do. You can just be like, here, I'm going to take this limited information, especially in cases where the birth parents are dead and all you find is a grave. I'm never going to get, you know, anything from my birth parents. So it's always going to be secondhand information. And you just don't know what your birth parents were thinking or feeling. Unless you're lucky enough to find like a friend or somebody who knew them real well, you're never going to know. Just keep an open mind and just complete the journey, and then you'll know everything you need to know, you know, about what happened before you were given to this other family.
Yeah, that's good advice, not to be judgmental.
Because, again, I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm sure you have too, where a lot of times the birth parents have very troubled lives before, during, and after the adoption. And it's like, what are you going to do? I mean, it's like, I feel like a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, she was a drug addict. Well, you know what I mean? Maybe she was, but, you know, have some empathy, just, I guess, is what I always try to do. Just have some empathy toward people and try to put yourself in their shoes, you know?
Yes.
Because it's tough. I can't imagine what it would be like to have a baby and then have somebody else raise it for my whole life.
Yeah.
Sounds like the worst. So, yeah. So I think if you start your journey from that perspective and understand that these might be broken people, very likely that you're going to find that, you know what I mean, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah. You'll be more understanding of them.
Right. Because they had to go through this. My adoptive parents were wonderful people. I had a wonderful life. They were ideal, but not everybody's life was like that either.
Yeah, that's true.
Some adoptive parents are terrible people, just like, you know, the rest of humanity, you know what I mean? Like, they come in all the different shapes and sizes.
Yep.
Unfortunately. So I was going to ask, how many of the people that you've talked to, how many have had great adoptive parents versus maybe like abusive, or they were like actually abusive, or just, you know, mentally abusive?
That's a good question. I actually haven't. I mean, I think about it when I'm speaking to people, but I haven't really thought about it overall. I mean, I know my dad's parents were great, and I know there's been at least one or two others that have maintained close relationships with their adoptive parents. Mm-hmm. There hasn't been a whole lot that were abusive, although I have heard those stories, and that's where I always wonder, why would you get a child and adopt them just to abuse them? That doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah. I don't know either, or to single them out in some way and make it so that they're always the adopted kid. You know, they're always like the redheaded stepchild, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard those stories too, all the way up to actual abuse and actual horrible things.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, overall, I think A lot of the stories I've heard, the negative they've had with their adoptive parents has been that they weren't really willing or open to them finding their birth families. And that was more, I think, out of fear or thinking that maybe they would lose them. And it wasn't so much, they didn't want them to know who they were. They just didn't want to lose the children that they loved.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, no, which I mean, you can understand that for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you would, like you said, you would think it's such a long process. Even for my parents, I know they had to go through the whole thing with, friends of theirs were interviewed and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It was like a whole process, even then. So,
Yeah.
to go through that whole thing only to I don't know, it seems counterintuitive, but people are people.
I never really asked my grandparents what happened when they adopted my dad, but he had records where nurses had come to the house and social workers to see him and do checkups for months after he was adopted.
Yeah. My parents mentioned that they'd had that too.
Yeah.
That, the social workers and stuff. So, I mean, it's they do check and stuff, but not for, I think, a year maybe, and then that's it. So.
Yeah. It's a lengthy and ongoing process, it seemed. And I don't know how much they had to pay to get my dad from Catholic Charities, but I'm sure there was a fee involved. So
I'm sure there was if it was, Catholics. I mean, they're all, see, and again, this is is this okay? Are we all okay with the idea that people are making money off of the sale of babies? This is a profitable billion-dollar industry too.
Oh, well, I'm sure all the religious organizations call it a donation. So
a donation to the pastor's multi-million-dollar house. But yeah, again, I mean, again, we go back to the actual sale of human beings, which again, I'm very uncomfortable with this whole idea.
Yeah.
Because again, what you end up happening is you get rich people who can adopt poor people's children.
Yeah, that's weird.
And that's because it's not like poor people get the opportunity to adopt children. They don't, because it's money.
Yeah.
It's expensive. So it's not really about the best parents for the kids.
Yeah, it's who can afford.
It's about who can afford it.
Yeah.
And that also kind of sucks. That's not ideal either.
Yeah, it definitely shouldn't be that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is a lot at play now as far as helping mothers keep their children.
I think so too. And there's a lot of adoption. There's a lot of people banging the drum about opening up records and stuff. A lot of states have started to do that. So that's good too.
Yeah, I'm surprised they haven't all done it based on just a few doing it. Seems really bizarre. They wouldn't all just do it.
I know. And, and sometimes, in the case of Easterhouse, all of their records, because they were closed down by the state, all of their records got confiscated and are now in the custody of the state of Illinois. And in order to get access to my records, I would have to go through this intermediary service.
Which costs money, right?
Yeah, this costs money. And there's no guarantee you're going to get anything out of it, because they can be oh, well, it's all blacked out or whatever. I mean, again, it's whatever you don't get to look through it. It's whatever they decide to give you. So again, what are we?
Yeah.
If I hadn't gone through DNA, I would have never found anybody. Because none of the avenues in which I had ever looked, I could ever discover even a clue.
I kind of wonder what would happen if tomorrow all the states were we're opening up all the records. I kind of wonder what would happen.
And maybe this is just because of my particular bent, but I feel like a lot of times it's not the women that are worried about it. Every pregnant woman's family knew they were pregnant. You know what I mean? It's not like they're hiding that.
Yeah.
But it's for the men. I feel like it's for the privacy of the men. There are men who have been leaving a trail maybe of babies in their wake, you know what I mean? And they don't want to know. Probably the number one problem that is this idea that we open up all the records, and everybody's on DNA and stuff like that, then everyone's going to find out everyone's dirty business.
Yeah.
And I know we talked about it when we talked before, the kids who are sperm donor babies.
Yes.
These are, this is all coming out of the woodwork too. It's this is more identity and more people, and again, primarily men, who are going to be outed as, and there's no crime. It's not like it's a bad thing that they went to these, clinics and stuff and did that. It's fine, but you knew that children were going to possibly be the product of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you go on Ancestry and you have like 30 half siblings.
Right, and your DNA, yeah, exactly. I mean, I actually read an article. A friend of mine sent me an article about that a couple years ago about this one guy who was a regular sperm donor, and he had 15 different children from 15 different women.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't his children. I'm using air quotes, children.
Yeah.
Because it's not really his children, because that's not really the deal, but still DNA connected, so that's got to be wild for that guy.
Yeah, he had all that offspring, we'll say.
Yes, offspring, yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that's another.
Right, we don't even know how to even describe them, because it's like they're not his children, so it's like we need like a new word for like the sperm donor baby,
Right, and can you imagine nowadays somebody going to do that? That's another layer that they have to think about because it's happening.
Right, exactly, because really a thing that happened. A lot of women. I actually know somebody who went to the sperm bank.
Yeah.
Who was like, I'm just gonna have kids now because I can do it. So good for her. But again, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Someday the kid's still gonna wonder.
Right.
And then they get on DNA.
Right.
So ancestry DNA.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. You're gonna find your half sibling because your dad. Like, I'm sure the sperm donor dads aren't anxious to get on to any of the DNA tests, but their kids, if they ever got married and had kids or had kids elseways, then yeah, they're gonna find out. It's a tangled web we weave, right?
Yeah. So if you get dad a DNA test for Christmas and he won't take it, you'll know why.
Right?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Okay, well, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
You're very welcome.
If you or someone in your family has been touched by adoption and would like to speak about it, please email me at whathappensadafterpodcast@gmail.com. Also, please check out the Instagram for the show to see pictures of my guests that they were so kind to share from the reunions. On the next episode, I'll talk to Lorraine, who you may know better as her social media persona, the Adopted Chameleon. Listen next time to find out what happens after. Thanks for listening.